Assalamu alaikum viewers, this is lecture 9 of your course Theory and Practice of Counseling. आपने लगता है मेरी नसीहत पर अमल किया है और इस दफ़ा आप पिछली दफ़ा का लेक्चर पढ़कर आए हुए हैं and that is a very good thing because you will understand the content more appropriately और आपको ये लगेगा कि जब मैं पिछले लेक्चर को रिव्यू करूंगी तो आपको समझने में ज़्यादा आसानी होगी. पिछली दफ़ा हमने जो टॉपिक शुरू किया था उसका उन्वान था इफेक्टिव काउंसलर and we discussed in the previous lecture that what are the characteristics of effective counselors? Effective counselors mean that who are most effective as far as the outcome of the therapy or counseling is concerned. We discussed a case of a famous counselor, Gerald Corey की बात की थी हमने पिछले लेक्चर में. Gerald Corey has experience of more than 30 years of practice of counseling profession. And he discussed various things as far as his early practice in counseling profession was concerned. And we learned that when he started counseling profession, then he at times felt that he wanted immediate reinforcement and feedback from his patients or clients. और उसको ये लगता था कि पेशेंट्स जो हैं वो बहुत जल्द अज जल्द जो है वो तंदुरुस्त हो जाएं और अगर इफ दे आर फीलिंग डिप्रेशन एंड एंजाइटी देन दे विल बी रिकवरिंग फ्रॉम दैट डिस्ट्रेस्ड फीलिंग. और उससे उसको बड़ी बाजुकात कोफ्त होती थी जब वो ये देखते थे कि पेशेंट तंदुरुस्त होने की बजाय जो है उनके प्रॉब्लम्स जो हैं वो बढ़ते जा रहे हैं. सो देन ही फाउंड आउट दैट एक्चुअली इन द बिगिनिंग ऑफ काउंसलिंग प्रोसेस व्हाट हैपन्स दैट क्लाइंट्स आर इन फैक्ट going through a process of self-awareness, and when people are having self-awareness then sometimes it becomes a difficult process and it is difficult to accept some dimensions of yourself which were totally ignored before. And it also happens that people when they are losing their defenses, then it is a difficult process and it is difficult to accept, as I said before, many dimensions of yourself. Then it happens sometimes that people instead of recovering they become worse. And then through experience a counselor learns that he should not be distressed himself by these kind of problems. और उसको अंडरस्टैंड कर लेना चाहिए कि ये एक काउंसलिंग प्रोसेस का हिस्सा है. और another thing which was very important as far as Gerald Corey and other counselors' experience is concerned, that if you do not deal with some experience or some feeling in your personal life, then you are not capable to deal with that kind of experience and feeling of other people. For example, Gerald Corey mentioned that he was often afraid to face the feelings which were related with depression, and he would try to avoid these kind of feelings. And the resulting factor was that when he started counseling, he found it difficult to deal with and to relate with those patients who were actually depressed, and instead he would like to have those patients who were very communicative, talkative and cheerful. So these kind of experiences of expert professionals tell us that in the beginning counselors should be patient and they should not be looking for immediate reinforcement or recovery from the client. Then we talked about three important factors that according to Carl Rogers are very important as far as effective counseling is concerned. These factors are in fact related with the practice of counseling, and these are empathy, unconditioned positive regard and genuineness or congruence on the part of the counselor. In fact, Rogers maintains that these three factors are so important that they are, if they are exhibited by any counselor, then perhaps that counselor doesn't need other techniques or theoretical orientations as much as these factors could contribute to the outcome of therapy. अब इन तीनों की बात करते हैं, what we have studied in the previous lecture. As far as empathy is concerned, empathy means that you are understanding the world from your client's perspective. Or empathy doesn't mean that you are being sympathetic towards your client. So empathy and sympathy could be understood differently because they are different concepts. Another thing important in understanding the concept of empathy is that when you are demonstrating an empathic attitude, it doesn't mean that you are leaving your own values and your belief system. You are not merging your values with those of the clients. In fact, you are just being very understanding and you are trying to see the world as it is perceived by the individual client. Then we talked about unconditioned positive regard. In fact, that concept tells us that the relationship between client and counselor is different than it is between the relatives. Relatives में यही होता है कि you do not give respect and positive regard to the person if that person is having some behavior that is not considered good in society or according to the norms of your family. So the difference in client and counselor relationship is that you are providing that respect to the client regardless of that person's attitudes, beliefs or value systems. Sometimes it could happen that you could not admire the behavior or values of the client, but you are accepting the person as an individual. So you accept the person, and it is not essential that you also accept his beliefs and values. The third concept was congruence or genuineness on the part of the counselor. It means that counselor behaves as he or she is, और वो कोशिश नहीं करता कि वो अपनी शख्सियत पे एक मुलम्मा चढ़ाकर क्लाइंट के साथ मिले. So he doesn't try to present a facade to the client. कोई आर्टिफिशियल चेहरा या पर्सोना जो है वो दिखाकर लोगों को इम्प्रेस करने की कोशिश नहीं करता. He is in fact demonstrating the behavior in the counseling process as he is, or he doesn't leave his values and belief systems. So these three factors are considered in fact very important by other researchers also apart from Carl Rogers. Let's see an example of congruence. आपको ये स्लाइड दिखा रही हूँ. इसमें एक नरेशन है क्लाइंट की तरफ से और उसके जवाब में काउंसलर क्या कहता है वो भी आप देखेंगे. क्लाइंट कहता है, माई पेरेंट्स डू नॉट अंडरस्टैंड मी. व्हेन आई वांट टू कम्युनिकेट माई व्यू पॉइंट टू देम दे थिंक आई एम बीइंग disrespectful. They don't understand that disagreeing doesn't mean being rude. Ab if the counselor is having a genuine attitude, so he would treat it as a phenomena that could happen with everyone. Or let's see कि counselor क्या कहता है. Counselor says, these kinds of communication gaps can sometimes exist between parents and their children. When I was a teenager, I often thought that it was difficult to make my parents understand what I felt. But it doesn't mean that you agree with your client every time. It just means that if counselor is having a particular kind of experience which is similar to that of the client, then there is no harm in sharing that experience with the client. Let's see one meta-analysis that was conducted by Combs and his colleagues in 1969. And that meta-analysis was about the traits and characteristics of an effective counselor. Meta-analysis का आपको पता होगा कि meta-analysis से क्या मुराद होती है. It means that sometimes researcher collect a number of studies on the same issue और उसके ऊपर वो different statistics जो है वो लगा कर ये determine करते हैं कि effect size क्या है. Effect size mean कि what is the effect of one variable on the other. तो usually ये statistics लगाई जाती है और इसके अलावा कोई और statistics भी लगाई जाती हैं for having a conclusive evidence of some particular issue. So that meta-analysis which was conducted by Combs and colleagues, what did it say? So they found major differences between effective and ineffective counselors, and they maintained that they were because of their personal beliefs and traits. So they found out in number of studies that the difference between effective and ineffective counselor was that they were different in their traits and characteristics. So it means that effective counselors used to demonstrate particular kind of traits and characteristics, demonstrate through their behavior, और ये पता चलता था कि उनके कौन सी characteristics हैं. और अब हम देखते हैं कि वो कौन सी characteristics हैं जिनकी इस meta analysis के जरिए निशानदेही की गई है. The major technique of counseling was the self as instrument. तो यहाँ हम ये देखते हैं कि the effective counselor would use self as the instrument. एक लेक्चर में मैंने आपको ये कहा था, the counseling is a different profession because in this profession people use people skills to help people to help themselves. So the counselor uses self as an instrument. It refers to the relationship that exists between client and counselor. If self is not used an instrument, तो उस relationship में जो है enrichment जो है वो खत्म हो जाती है. The enrichment means that relationship is not that powerful as it should have been. Or counseling doesn't rely much on techniques as far as psychological tests are concerned. Although it happens frequently that tests are also used to assess an individual client, लेकिन ज़्यादा importance उस relationship की है that exists between the client and counselor. उसके अलावा what did they find out? they found that effective counselors perceived other people as able rather than unable to solve their problems. It means that they were able than unable to solve their own problems, to manage their own lives. And here, the thing important, the consideration which is very important is that it is not that people are actually able or unable. It is that counselor perceives them as able rather than unable. What is the philosophy behind that particular belief? The thing is that counseling in fact is the process in which the individual client helps himself or herself to grow or to solve his problems. और जब that person will be able to solve his problems, then that whole procedure is possible. तो अगर काउंसलर जो है वो ये बिलीव करता है कि क्लाइंट अपने प्रॉब्लम्स को हल ही नहीं कर सके था, तो then the whole idea जो है that fails. And what else? Then they are also dependable, friendly and worthy. So they perceive people as able to solve their problems and then perceives them as friendly people, worthy people. They are capable to do things, they are able to grow themselves and they are able to solve their own problems, because that is the basic idea of counseling. और अगर आप पेशेंट में या क्लाइंट में यही चीज़ मिस कर देंगे तो फिर आप क्लाइंट की पोटेंशियल्स पर रिलाई नहीं कर सकते. एंड यू हैव टू रिलाई ऑन द पोटेंशियल्स ऑफ द क्लाइंट, क्योंकि आपने क्लाइंट को कोई रेडीमेड डिसीजन या कोई सॉल्यूशंस जो हैं वो निकाल कर नहीं देने होते. Another thing was that these effective counselors were more likely to identify with people rather than things. And this is a very important factor, that these people should be better in their social relationships. They like to communicate with people more. And rather than object kind of people, they are people oriented. So that is why they would be able to maintain and keep a relationship with the clients. Another study which was conducted by Mayer and Davis in 2001 showed that helpers who are the most effective strive to apply the 4 following principles to assess characteristics of others. So, to assess the characteristics of others, they rely on 4 principles. So, let's see what are these 4 principles. One is that they become aware of their personal issues. So, it is very important for the counselor that counselor is aware of his own personal issues, his values, his attitudes, his beliefs. Because the golden principle of counseling is that first you become aware of yourself, you are able to know what is your real self, and then you will be able to help other people. Because आपने दूसरे लोगों को ये awareness ही दिलानी है उनकी self के बारे में. So if you do not know yourself, if you do not know about your basic beliefs and value systems, so how you will be able and how you will be helping the client to do the same act for him or herself. The second thing is that you should be open to supervision. हमने history of counseling profession में और उसके बाद goals of counseling में भी ये देखा कि it is very important that counselor is always open to learning. और जो modern requirements हैं लाइसेंसर वगैरह की, वो भी ये हैं कि the counselor should be having continuing education, should be able to attend workshops, seminars on काउंसलिंग प्रोसेस एंड टेक्निक्स, और उसके साथ साथ उसको साथ साथ सुपरविजन भी लेते रहना चाहिए. सो वेन एवर देर इज अ प्रॉब्लम ही शुड बी एबल टू कंसल्ट अदर पीपल. और वैसे भी ये एक नॉर्मल रूटीन है इन द प्रैक्टिस ऑफ काउंसलिंग कि आप सुपरविजन साथ साथ लेते रहें. द थर्ड थिंग इज दैट द काउंसलर शुड अवॉइड hiding behind the use of too many tests. As I mentioned before, that although psychological tests are frequently employed in counseling profession, but the effective counselor does not rely on them, because effective counselor relies more on the relationship that builds between the client and counselor. क्योंकि अगर आप टेस्ट पे रिलाई करते हैं तो टेस्ट तो कोई भी डिमॉन्स्ट्रेट कर सकता है, लेकिन जो रिलेशनशिप है वो सिर्फ एक प्रोफेशनल काउंसलर जो है वो ही जानता है कि कैसे मेंटेन किया जाना चाहिए. The fourth and last principle is that he should consult when presented with an ethical dilemma. We talked about ethical issues and we discussed that whenever there is a problem, for example, having a dual relationship with clients or other problems, तो उस वक्त उनको दूसरे counselors के साथ consult कर लेना चाहिए so that the situation is more clear. So these were few studies which talked about personal characteristics of effective counselors. Let's see what are the individual characteristics which make a counselor an effective counselor. कौन कौन सी चीज़ें हैं जो important हैं एक counselor को इफेक्टिव बनाने में. So there are a few things which I would like to discuss with you. First of all, I would like to discuss motives. Counselor के क्या motives हैं to enter in this profession? Then emotional responsiveness of the counselor, sense of worth and anxieties, sex role identity and expectations, value system of counselors, and then cultural bias, awareness about cultural biases. Let's first discuss counselors' motives to enter the counseling profession. There could be several motives due to which counselors could decide to enter into that profession. और obviously उस वक्त वो counselors नहीं होंगे, जैसे students होते हैं तो उस वक्त ये सोचते हैं कि हम different subjects पढ़ रहे हैं. आप भी ये सोचते होंगे कि मैं different subjects पढ़ रहा हूँ या पढ़ रही हूँ, तो इसमें से कौन सा जो है वो मुझे अच्छा लगता है. Maybe I would like to become a clinical psychologist in future. Maybe you would like to become a counselor, or maybe you would like to go to industrial sector. So it depends on your choices, your aptitudes and interests. So what are the motives when one person decides to enter the counseling profession? First motive that a counselor to be could have is humanism. Basically, effective counselors are committed to make themselves better, to make other people better, to create a better world. And it is very important क्योंकि काउंसलिंग प्रोफेशन का मकसद ही यही है कि ऐसे इंडिविजुअल्स क्रिएट किए जाएं who are self-aware, who can grow, who can understand themselves, who can work more effectively in their life. So what is the purpose of entering into this profession? If the counselor have this motive, humanism, तो ये बहुत अच्छा मोटिव है. और ये ज़रूरी नहीं है कि ये क्रिएट किया जाए. सम पीपल वुड हैव दैट मोटिव इन देयर पर्सनैलिटीज़, और इनका बाज़-औक़ात यही एम्बिशन होता है टू क्रिएट अ बेटर वर्ल्ड. एंड बेसिकली व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट ह्यूमनिज्म, इट रेफर्स टू एम्पावरिंग क्लाइंट टू वर्क फॉर हिज कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग. द सेकेंड थिंग दैट कुड मोटिवेट अ ट्रेनी or a student to become a counselor is that people orientation. Some students or some people who are studying counseling, they might be aware that they have people orientation or not. I would like to mention here one theory that was presented by Holland, that is a Holland's theory of personality type. He talks about various personality types which are actually the result of heredity and environmental factors. So through the interaction of heredity and environment, people could develop some kind of personality. And he talks about 6 different kinds of personality, which could be, for example, one is realistic personality type, second is investigative, then artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. For a counselor, it is better if the personality type is social rather than others. और ये भी हो सकता है कि आपकी सोशल के साथ कोई और पर्सनैलिटी टाइप भी हो. सो द पर्सन कुड हैव मोर देन वन पर्सनैलिटी टाइप, बट इट वुड बी डेफिनेटली इफेक्टिव इफ दैट पर्सन वुड बी हैविंग अ पीपल ओरिएंटेशन और अ सोशल पर्सनैलिटी टाइप. देन अनदर थिंग इज इंटेलेक्चुअल क्यूरियोसिटी. सम पीपल आर इंटरेस्टेड in making and testing hypotheses about human nature, and they enjoy this process. They would like to devise their own theories about human nature. They would like to revise this in the light of their own experiences. So if this factor is present in a person who is a counselor, then this is a real good motive that could be present in an effective counselor. Another thing is that the counselor would have worked through emotional pain. If the counselor would have worked through his emotional pain, then it would make that counselor more sensitive to other people's issues. और ये तो एक लाजमी बात है कि people would have negative and positive experiences in their life, and they would have gone through emotional pains. ये ऐसा नहीं है कि कोई शख्स जो है वो इस प्रोसेस से गुजरा होता है और कोई नहीं. Almost everyone does go through these experiences. और इन एक्सपीरियंसेस के नतीजे में if the person learns how to deal with that in his life, या कम अज कम is able to confront that problem and would be able to deal with that problem more effectively, then that person would be more sensitive to other people's issues. इसके बरक्स जैसे आपने जेराल्ड कोरी की मिसाल सुनी थी कि if you would in the beginning think that you do not want to deal with one particular problem, for example, if I am depressed, I would try to avoid that. फीलिंग और मैं उसका सामना करने से घबराऊंगी तो इट विल बी डिफिकल्ट फॉर मी कि मैं उसी फीलिंग को किसी और के अंदर अच्छे तरीके से डील कर सकूं. But it also doesn't mean that if you are having problem on one dimension of these kind of things, then throughout your life you cannot become an effective counselor. And the good example is Gerald Corey himself, क्योंकि उसके बावजूद he is considered a very expert professional in the counseling field. And then the next point is commitment to competence. Commitment to competence means that the person is committed to learn, and it has several components जो कि कमिटमेंट को जाहिर करते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, दैट पर्सन इज रेडी टू वर्क विथ फुल ऑनेस्टी इन दैट प्रोफेशन. दैट पर्सन इज रेडी टू लर्न फ्रॉम सुपरविजन. दैट पर्सन इज रेडी टू discuss professional and ethical issues and try to understand them and practice in his own life. So these are the few issues which are important and considered good motives for entering into counseling profession. So we were just talking about beneficial motives to enter into this profession. अब ये एक ऐसी लिस्ट नहीं थी कि जो मैं ये कह सकूं कि ये complete list है. People could have other beneficial motives as well, लेकिन due to constraint of time we have to discuss the most important ones. Now we will be discussing the harmful motives. कुछ ऐसे motives भी होते हैं जो कि अच्छे नहीं होते just for deciding कि you are interested in this particular profession. First of all, you could have unresolved emotional pain. If your emotional pain is unresolved, then what problem it could create? The problem is that if some issue is unresolved, you would not like to face that problem when you are dealing with your clients. For example, if a woman was having problem with his husband, she got divorced, and she has obviously gone through an emotional pain, और she is a counselor, और जब कभी किसी ऐसे client से मिलती है who is talking about a happy marital life, तो she finds it really difficult to concentrate on the elements of the talk that the client is having. So if the person has gone through that emotional pain successfully and उसको realize कर लिया है कि okay, that maybe was better for my life, so then it is possible for the client, for the counselor to deal more effectively when the client is talking about the same issues. The next is do-gooding. ये एक अजीब किस्म की terminology लगती है, पर इससे मुराद ये है कि you have joined that profession because you want the approval of other people, or you want to know from other people कि everyone is praising you and they are saying yes, he is the great person who has done so and so. So you like to hear from people that you are a very good counselor, and all the time you need that kind of reinforcement. So these kind of counselors actually treat clients as objects, क्योंकि objects हैं जो आपको एक मैकेनिक अंदाज में reinforcement उनसे चाहिए होती है, because people can behave very differently and people have individual differences. So they treat individual clients as objects and infantilize them, कि जिस तरह से एक बचकाना behavior होता है वो उनके साथ associate कर लेते हैं. So they are looking at the reinforcement of their clients each and every time, and that motive is not considered good for entering into this profession. The next is seeking intimacy. Some people are attracted to counseling profession because they think it provides an opportunity to have an emotional intimacy with the client or multiple clients. Even Carl Rogers, who was obviously a very effective counselor, he confessed that in the beginning he had this motive, that he really liked to have emotional intimacy with people because he was a social kind of people-oriented person. और उससे हो सकता है कि you will be looking for psychological and emotional intimacy, but later people do discover that this is not a good motive, और अगर वो उसको ख़त्म कर सकें तो बेहतर है. The last one is true believerism. अब true believerism जो है, in fact, that is lack of openness to conflicting evidence that doesn't match with your value systems. So it means if you truly believe in something, that is not a bad thing, क्योंकि आप obviously you truly believe on something. लेकिन if you so truly believe that you are not open to the conflicting evidence, that this condition is not good for the counseling process. क्योंकि फिर आपका जो भी नजरिया बन चुका होगा, you will not be able, you will not be ready to listen the point of view of your client. and you will not be able to change your point of view. Another thing is that it is not essential कि आप अपना व्यू पॉइंट चेंज कर लें, बट एटलीस्ट you should be open to listen what other person says. इसकी बहुत सारी मिसालें ली जा सकती हैं, बिकॉज हमें नॉर्मल लाइफ में नजर आते हैं. पीपल आर ट्रू बिलीवर्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, सम पीपल कुड बिलीव दैट देयर रिलीजन इज बेस्ट, और असल में देखा जाए तो हर रिलीजन में अच्छी बातें होती हैं, लेकिन वो किसी और रिलीजन की बात सुनने पर ही तैयार नहीं होते. तो जनरली पीपल शुड बी रिस्पेक्टिंग ऑल काइंड ऑफ रिलीजन्स, और ओपन भी होना चाहिए कि हर तरह की बात सुन ली जाए. एंड स्पेशली दिस इज इम्पॉर्टेंट फॉर द काउंसलर दैट इफ द क्लाइंट बिलोंग्स टू सम अदर सोशल क्लास, some other culture, some other religion, then he should be open to the experiences of the client. और उसमें उसको अपनी राय जो है वो मुसल्लत नहीं करनी चाहिए. Another example is theoretical orientation. For example, someone believes that behaviorism is the best theoretical orientation, and some other person may believe that client-centered method is the best one as far as counseling profession is concerned. Or there is no harm in practicing one or another kind of theoretical orientation or school of thought, but they should always be open to learn from other theoretical orientations as well. Another important personal characteristic of an effective counselor is emotional responsiveness. Actually, that refers to the genuineness and spontaneity of a counselor, and that definitely helps in the relation building of client and counselor. One point that is important in this reference is inability and repressed feelings. Sometimes it happens कि during the process of growing up, parents जो हैं वो बच्चों को बताते हैं कि फलां behavior बुरा है, फलां चीज़ें जो हैं वो बुरी हैं, हमें उससे इज्तनाब करना चाहिए. There are certain thoughts which shall be avoided, और फलां चीज़ का गुनाह है. और obviously that is a part of socialization and education which is a must in society. लेकिन कभी कभार इससे बच्चों के जहन पर गलत असरात भी हो जाते हैं. गलत असरात से मेरी ये मुराद है कि फॉर एग्जाम्पल इट हैज़ बीन सीन दैट व्हेन द एडोलेसेंट्स आर टोल्ड दैट थिंकिंग अबाउट ऑपोजिट सेक्स इज सिन, तो इट मे बी पॉसिबल दैट व्हेन दे आर ग्रोन अप अडल्ट्स so they will be feeling problem when they will be having physical or psychological or emotional intimacy with their spouse. तो इस तरह की repressed feeling से people would be losing their responsiveness. And this responsiveness is very much essential as far as the relationship between client and counselor is concerned. And these people could be actually unable to emotionally respond toward their client. और ये आपको पता है कि थेरेपी में ये एक अच्छी चीज़ नहीं होती, because counseling profession is based on the relationship between the client and counselor. The next thing which Carl Rogers actually emphasizes is that sometimes counselors internalize others' feelings as if your own. और वो counselors ऐसा कैसे करते हैं? It becomes actually a part of our personality that we internalize other people's values and beliefs. और हम ये भी समझने लगते हैं ultimately कि that as if they are our own beliefs and values. And that is also a part of socialization. क्योंकि जब बच्चे की तरबियत की जाती है तो जो पेरेंट्स जो भी उसको बताते हैं वो उसकी एक पर्सनैलिटी का पार्ट बन जाता है. And sometimes the person is not aware that what beliefs and what values are actually his own and what are actually showing the effect of significant others in his life. The third thing is transferring unfinished businesses. हमारी ज़िंदगी में बहुत सारे unfinished businesses होते हैं, और unfinished businesses से ये मुराद है कि कोई ऐसी emotional association, experience जिससे हम निकल ना सके हों, और कोई ऐसा पेनफुल एक्सपीरियंस जो अभी तक हमारे साथ चल रहा हो, एंड दैट इज टॉर्चरिंग और हर्टिंग अस व्हेन एवर वी थिंक अबाउट दैट, और एनीथिंग विच इज रिमाइंडिंग अस ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर एक्सपीरियंस. सो इट इज पॉसिबल दैट समटाइम आवर परसेप्शंस आर एक्चुअली डिस्टॉर्टेड बाय दीज काइंड ऑफ ट्रांसफर्स फ्रॉम आवर पास्ट. हमारी जिंदगी में कोई ऐसे वाकयात हो चुके होते हैं और वो अभी तक हमारे साथ चल रहे होते हैं, and they could be transferring to the relationships that we are currently having. For example, the client और counselor का relationship लीजिए कि client और counselor के relationship में हो सकता है कि the counselor would be have some unfinished business, and then he will be transferring the associations or the feelings he had towards significant others in his life in past to the current counseling relationship. और ये जो ट्रांसफरेंस है, sometime it could be positive or it could be negative. For example, the client is similar to one of my friends, और उस फ्रेंड के साथ मेरा बहुत अच्छा वक्त गुजरा, लेकिन उसके बाद उसने मुझे धोखा दे दिया. So whenever I see client, I feel anger inside me, और मुझे मुश्किल लगता है कि मैं उसके साथ डील कर सकूं. तो इस तरह के अनफिनिश्ड बिजनेसेस जो होते हैं, they go along in our life and they are sometime causing disturbance in creating a good relationship between client and counselor. The next point is counselor's sense of worth and anxieties. So as far as personal characteristics of an effective counselor is concerned, it is very important that the counselor should have a sense of worth. उसकी self esteem जो है, that should be high, और positive self esteem उसकी होनी चाहिए. Sense of worth जो है वो बनती कैसे है? Again, it is related with our childhood experiences. हमारा family environment कैसी थी? If we had secure parents, that they will be transferring those secure feelings to their children. Or if the family is having dysfunctional relationship and the parents themselves are insecure, then they will be transferring that insecurity toward their children. And the resulting factor is that the child will be having less sense of worth. And that less sense of worth will be leading to anxieties and fears. And that could be affecting the relationship between client and counselor. So basically हम ये कह सकते हैं कि sense of worth is opposite to anxieties and fears or insecurities. The person who would have an uneven relationship with parents and the person who would have insecure home environment as far as his childhood is concerned, that person will be feeling insecure maybe throughout his life. Another point which is important as far as personal characteristics of an effective counselor is meaninglessness or meaningfulness in life. Several theorists have talked about this issue as being very important to the effectiveness of a counselor. For example, Viktor Frankl, Jung and Rollo May had pointed out that it is very important for human beings to be satisfied with their life and to have good interaction with other people, that they have a meaning, a purpose in life. Viktor Frankl के बारे में मैं आपको बात बताती हूँ कि he had lost his entire family during World War II. और entire family से मेरी मुराद ये है कि बीवी, parents, भाई. And then he found out that it is important to have some personal meaning in life, to create a personal meaning in life, क्योंकि जब तक आप एक special meaning life का create नहीं करेंगे, it is difficult to live. और sometimes the circumstances are like that कि real meaning is lost और आपको ये लगता है कि अब आपकी जिंदगी का कोई फायदा नहीं है. लेकिन the person has to create a meaning toward working effectively in this life. क्योंकि meaninglessness जो है, that is a big problem of modern day man, and that has been acknowledged by several theorists. The next point is fears and anxieties, which is opposite to sense of worth and security. Sullivan, in fact, talked about this issue quite a lot, and he maintained that most of human communication, in fact 90% of human communication, is designed not to communicate because of these fears and anxieties. और हम जिस तरह से एक दूसरे के साथ इंटरेक्ट करते हैं, वो कम्युनिकेशन नहीं है, बिकॉज ये कम्युनिकेशन जो है वो दैट इज बेसिकली गिविंग एंड टेकिंग, लिसनिंग प्रॉपरली टू द अदर पर्सन. और हम इसके बारे में व्हाट इज एक्टिव लिसनिंग, इसके बारे में अगले लेक्चर्स में बात करेंगे. दैट इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट characteristic of a good relationship between client and counselor. So as far as fears and anxieties are concerned, sometimes these fears and anxieties could have some positive effect on counseling process, and sometimes it could be really debilitating for the counseling process. So let's see कि इनके positives क्या हैं और negatives क्या हैं. The positive consequences if the counselor is having some fears and anxieties, वो क्या हैं कि he will be sensitive to client's anxieties. If the client is having anxieties and counselor is having anxiety, some anxiety or fear, so he will be more sensitive to those kind of feelings of the client. तो उनको जल्दी पिक कर लेगा, उनकी तरफ ज़्यादा responsive होगा. So another dimension is included in that, and that is emotional responsiveness. What is the other advantage? The other advantage of having fears and anxieties is that it is necessary to tone counselors up because counselors will be working hard, or they will be more mobilized, more energetic to work because they could be able to understand their anxieties and their clients as well. But there are several negatives associated with having fears and anxieties as far as counselor is concerned. First of all, there is that it may cease them to listen accurately. So the counselors may cease to listen accurately. यानी वो तवज्जो से बात नहीं सुन सकते because of their own anxieties. They are anxious, and because they are anxious, when the client is talking, they are not able to concentrate. और आपने ये देखा होगा अपनी जिंदगी में कि जब आप परेशान होते हैं, आपको कोई एक प्रॉब्लम दरपेश होती है घर में या वर्क में या पढ़ाई में, तो आपको ये लगता है कि इट इज़ डिफिकल्ट फॉर यू टू कंसंट्रेट ऑन व्हाट अदर पर्सन इज सेइंग. द नेक्स्ट थिंग इज दैट the counselor may perceive and relate to clients in terms of their own needs. If the counselor is having anxiety himself, so maybe he would try to satisfy his needs through client. जबकि पर्पस जो है वो ये है काउंसलिंग रिलेशनशिप का that the client's needs shall be satisfied. और क्लाइंट की प्रमोशन के लिए काम किया जाना चाहिए. बट द जो काउंसलर है that tries to nurture himself rather than to nurture the client. Another problem associated with fears and anxieties is that the counselor may assume too much responsibility. Assuming responsibility is good as far as counseling relationship is concerned. But whenever a person assumes too much responsibility, whether it is a teacher who assumes too much responsibility of his students, or whether it is a mental health professional who assumes too much responsibilities of his clients, it is not a good indication. The reason is एक तो वो उनके काम खुद करना शुरू कर देता है, उनके लिए डिसाइड करने लग पड़ता है और अपनी पर्सनल लाइफ को सेग्रीगेट नहीं कर सकता उसकी अपनी प्रोफेशनल लाइफ से. So whenever he is having his personal time at home with his family, with his children and wife and husband, then he may be thinking about the individual clients, and that is not a good indication. Another thing is that there could be several problems associated with excessive anxiety. Excessive anxiety किस तरह से पता चलती है? For example, the counselor will be asking too many questions because he is anxious, he is not assured himself about his capabilities. तो वो इस फौरन जब क्लाइंट एक बात करके चुप करता है, और मे बी कि क्लाइंट को एक स्पेस की ज़रूरत होती है, कुछ टाइम की ज़रूरत होती है, मे बी बिकॉज to be clear about his own thoughts, his feelings, what is going through in his mind, तो उसको थोड़ी सी टाइमिंग की ज़रूरत होती है ताकि वो ज़्यादा क्लियर अपने बारे में सोच सके. लेकिन काउंसलर एंशियस है तो वो सवालों की भरमार किए जा रहा है, एंड दैट इज़ नॉट अ गुड इंडिकेशन इन द काउंसलिंग प्रोसेस. तो वन थिंग इज़ दैट it could lead to this problem that the counselor may ask too many questions. The second thing is that if the counselor is having excessive anxiety, he may be very directive. Jabki this is not the purpose of counseling कि you give directions to client's life. The client should be ultimately able to solve his problems himself or herself. लेकिन the counselor, because of his own anxieties, is not assured of himself, तो वो क्या करता है कि वो बहुत ज़्यादा डायरेक्टिव हो जाता है because he is concerned that he must be approved or his skills must be approved by the client. तो उसमें कोई कोताही ना हो जाए और ये ना हो कि क्लाइंट समझे कि इसको ज़्यादा आता नहीं है, and that usually happens with the beginning counselors. Another point is that he could offer reassurance. So the reassurance is a positive dimension of counseling relationship, but sometimes this reassurance could be undue. It could be very exaggerated जिसकी काउंसलिंग में ज़रूरत नहीं होती. So these kind of problems could happen due to excessive anxiety on the part of the counselor. The next thing is sex role identity and expectations. You may be well aware that in our culture and obviously in other cultures, children are taught from the very beginning that what role they will be playing as far as their gender is concerned. And they will be playing that role in relation and in reference to their gender. So certain psychological characteristics have been traditionally viewed as either feminine or masculine. For example, men are more likely to be dominant, assertive, ambitious, could be aggressive also. As compared to that, women are expected to be nurturing, friendly, kind, cooperative, accommodating, and so on. These are the traits which have been associated with different gender, and people expect people to behave accordingly. And the problem arises when women do not totally behave in that particular fashion, or men जो हैं वो they are not behaving as traditionally they are thought or they are perceived to behave. So problems क्या पैदा होते हैं कि sometime a woman is having a managerial job, so she becomes bossy because that is the demand of the job, and she is negatively evaluated by the employees because they do not expect her to behave in that way. But on the contrary, if that role was played by some male manager, so they will accept that particular kind of behavior. Similarly, इसका एक ये भी नुकसान होता है कि the male are usually not responsive to other people's needs as far as children are concerned, disabled are concerned. तो आप ये देखेंगे कि काउंसलर्स भी ज़्यादातर ख़वातीन कहा जाता है कि ज़्यादा कामयाब होती हैं, साइकोथेरेपिस्ट भी बहुत कामयाब होती हैं बिकॉज ऑफ दीज ट्रेट्स. अब ये ट्रेट्स जो हैं वो लोगों की एक्सपेक्टेशंस का नतीजा हैं या लोगों की परसेप्शंस का नतीजा हैं. दैट इज़ अ सेपरेट इशू. Sometimes people could behave in that way that could be showing the effect of both gender. For example, the androgynous male or female is flexible masculine or feminine as circumstances warrant, and that was pointed out in 1981 by Bem. So he pointed out that the ideal condition is when you pick up the good traits of both gender, and people can be developed in that way, और उनकी इस तरह से तरबियत की जा सकती है that they could have a capacity to demonstrate the good qualities of both gender irrespective of whether they are male or female. Or androgyny has been seen a very good indication as far as managerial relationships are concerned, and those managers are found to be more effective who demonstrate both good positive male and female traits. Our current sex role identity is the internalized sum of individual differences, personal situational factors, cultural, social and environmental influences. So, how do we learn these gender stereotypes? और हम अपनी ज़ात में कैसे inculcate करते हैं the characteristics of that particular gender that we are having? It is through social factors, it is through cultural factors, as far as several psychological variables. आपने ये देखा होगा कि अगर आप बच्चों की किताबें देखें तो उसमें मेल्स और फीमेल्स आर डिफरेंटली ड्रेस्ड अप. सिमिलरली अ मेल और फीमेल चाइल्ड इज आस्क्ड टू बिहेव डिफरेंटली बाय द पेरेंट्स. जैसे लड़कियों को ये बताया जाता है कि उन्होंने ज़्यादा गुस्सा नहीं करना, और हमारे मुल्क में ये जैसे खासा एक कॉमन जुमला है जो कि लड़कियों को कहा जाता है कि तुम लड़की ज़ात हो के इस तरह कर रही हो तो तुम्हें ये जेब नहीं देता, लड़की हो तुम चुप करके बैठो. सो दिस काइंड ऑफ बिहेवियर इज एक्सपेक्टेड यूजुअली फ्रॉम अ मेल बॉय, और मेल चाइल्ड जो है उससे आप एक्सपेक्ट कर लेते हैं जो कि आप फीमेल चाइल्ड से एक्सपेक्ट नहीं करते. सो वी लर्न दीज काइंड ऑफ कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स एंड दे बिकम पार्ट ऑफ आवर पर्सनैलिटी थ्रू सोशलाइजेशन. फिर उसके बाद हम जब स्कूल में जाते हैं तो फिर हमारे जो टीचर्स हैं दे बिहेव डिफरेंटली टू अस, एंड दैट डिपेंड्स ऑन आवर जेंडर. And then teachers tell us that which profession is suitable for a male and for a female. खास किस्म के professions जो हैं उनमें तवक्को की जाती है कि males should enter and females should enter. So this kind of gender role identity we learn from our social and cultural factors. और उसी के मुताबिक जो है people do expect other people to behave. So अब यहाँ पे इसका ताल्लुक जो है वो effective counselor के साथ क्या है? Effective counselor जो है he should be able to view other people not strictly in the boundary of those expectations. He should be able कि एक female जो है she can behave assertively, a female can be behaving dominantly, a female can be very ambitious, and he should not be surprised when he finds such a female client. So counselors may assess clients differently according to whether or not they fit into traditional sex roles. So it happens frequently that counselors, if they are very traditional counselors, they would not like males to behave in an opposite way. That is not expected, of course, and they do not like females to behave in a male dominant characteristic role. So it is important for the counselor that he should be able to accept individuals whatever behaviors they will be demonstrating. लेकिन हमारे डीलिंग का लोगों के साथ जब भी हम डील करते हैं तो बहुत फर्क पड़ता है what we are expecting from different gender. अब एक एक्टिविटी करते हैं that is about thinking about your sex role identity and expectations. यहाँ पर कुछ सवालात दिए हुए हैं और आप उन सबका अपने बारे में जवाब दीजिए. फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज डिड यू गेट डिफरेंट टॉयज ऑन अकाउंट ऑफ योर सेक्स, यानी बचपन में आपको जो टॉयज दिए जाते थे वर दे रिलेटेड टू योर सेक्स, मेल और फीमेल, और किस तरह के टॉयज दिए जाते थे. द सेकेंड क्वेश्चन इज डिड यू गेट डिफरेंट क्लोथ्स इंक्लूडिंग देयर कलर ऑन अकाउंट ऑफ योर सेक्स, दैट व्हाट काइंड ऑफ कलर्स योर पेरेंट्स वांटेड यू टू वेयर or were they related with your gender or not. Another question is what roles your mother and father play in caring for you as a child. What were the different duties that your mother and father were doing with you. कौन सी duties थी जो वो perform कर रहे थे. जैसे कि आपको look after करना, एक बच्चा जब खाना खाता है उसको खाना खिलाना, कपड़े पहनाना, bathing के लिए लेके जाना, पढ़ाई में मदद करना, साइकिलिंग सिखाना, गाड़ी चलाना सिखाना, या फिर और बहुत सी एक्टिविटीज हो सकती हैं. अनदर क्वेश्चन इज व्हाट डज और डिड द फॉलोइंग टास्क्स इन योर फैमिली. ये काम जो है वो कौन कौन करता है आपकी फैमिली में. डस्टिंग, शॉपिंग फॉर फूड, आयरनिंग, वॉशिंग क्लोथ्स, कुकिंग, मेंडिंग क्लोथ्स, लुकिंग आफ्टर द कार, फिक्सिंग मशीनरी, changing a fuse, decorating house, etc. It is not essential that in your household these tasks are definitely done. हो सकता है कोई काम आपके घर में होते हो इस तरह के और बाज काम ना किए जाते हों, but whatever are the activities in relation to these kind of works, तो आपने ये देखना है कि आपके घर में मदर, फादर या आपका बड़ा भाई या बहन कौन ये काम करते हैं. And then you would have an integrated idea of about your sex role identity. All the activities that you were taught to do, that you were helped to do in your childhood would be very consistent with your gender role, with your gender actually, और जो आप role play करेंगे वो उसके मुताबिक consistent होता है. And similarly you would notice that your expectation will be different for other people when you will be dealing with men or women, and similarly your parents' expectations were differently for yourself and for your brother or sister. एक और एक्टिविटी करते हैं, ये स्लाइड देखिए. दिस इज अबाउट लर्निंग साइकोलॉजिकल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स. पहली जो बात हमने की थी वो तो कुछ इस तरह की चीजें थी कि जो आपकी चॉइसेस वगैरह के साथ ताल्लुक रखती थी. अब व्हाट अबाउट साइकोलॉजिकल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स, हाउ डू वी लर्न देम. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, which of the following psychological characteristics do you consider each of your parents either encourage you or discourage you to show. अब ये कौन कौन सी characteristics हैं. gentleness, ambitiousness, feeling of vulnerability, sensitivity, competitiveness, career orientation, dominance, concern with your clothes, being nurturing, home orientation, etc. तो आप ये नोट करेंगे कि जो आपकी मदर की साइकोलॉजिकल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं जो आप में इनकलकेट आपकी मदर ने की हैं, दे आर वेरी मच फेमिनिन ओरिएंटेड. इसके बरक्स जो हैं जो मेल डोमिनेंट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स विल बी मोर डिस्प्लेड एंड इनकलकेटेड इन योर पर्सनैलिटी बाय योर फादर. And these exercises would help you determine your sex role identity, your expectations for different gender, and as far as the development of your personality and psychological characteristics as far as your gender is concerned. So that was all about today's lecture. Let's review what we have studied today. Today we talked about some other personal characteristics of an effective counselor. In the previous lecture, we talked about 3 main characteristics of an effective counselor as are seen by Rogers. Today, in the beginning, we talked about a meta-analysis which was conducted by Combs and colleagues. And that meta-analysis showed that most of the effective counselors actually perceive other people in a more positive way. And they believe that other people are able to do most of the things than perceiving them as unable. At the same time, effective counselors perceive other people as open, friendly and worthy. इसका मतलब ये है कि हम पॉजिटिवली लोगों को परसीव करते हैं तो उसका असर जो है वो थेरेपी पे ये होता है कि द पर्सन इज एबल टू ग्रो इन अ पॉजिटिव मैनर. एंड देन वी टॉक्ड अबाउट अदर कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स इंडिविजुअली, कि कौन कौन सी पर्सनल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं जो कि एक इफेक्टिव काउंसलर को हेल्प कर सकती हैं या फिर हिंडर कर सकती हैं. वी टॉक्ड ऑन द फर्स्ट प्लेस अबाउट मोटिव्स टू एंटर द प्रोफेशन. People could have very beneficial motives to enter the profession. For example, humanism is really good if you believe to empower your clients, because that is related with making yourself better, making other people better, and that is obviously to create a better world for everyone's living. And then people could have other dimensions that are positive. For example, you want to help other people, or you want to have people orientation. आपको ये लगता है कि आप लोगों के साथ मिलकर ज़्यादा खुश रहते हैं, आप लोगों के साथ अच्छे तरीके से डील कर सकते हैं. सो दोज काउंसलर्स हु हैव पीपल ओरिएंटेशन, दे आर मोर इफेक्टिव एंड दे आर मोर सक्सेसफुल इन देयर प्रोफेशन. Similarly, we talked about harmful motives. For example, do-gooding. You want reinforcement from other people. And you are in the profession because you want to nurture yourself rather than to nurture other people. And you have some unfinished businesses. So these kind of motives could in fact create problem in the relationship of client and counselor. Then we talked about emotional responsiveness of the counselor. Emotional responsiveness is particularly important in the relationship of client and counselor because it is related with the spontaneity and flexibility of the counselor. And then we talked about sense of worth and anxieties. In fact, they are opposite to each other, because those people who are lacking in self-worth, they are having more anxieties. Or those people who have insecure parents and a difficult kind of home environment, they will be turning into insecure adults. Or insecure adults जो हैं, they have more anxieties. And if they would have more anxieties, as a counselor, they would be finding it difficult to deal in an effective way with their client. Then we also discussed that sometimes these anxieties and fears could have a positive impact on the therapy also. For example, they could be more responsive to the anxieties of the client, and also it will mobilize the counselor to work more effectively for the individual client. And then we also talked about other negatives associated with these anxieties. If the counselor is very anxious himself or herself, then the counselor could behave in a way which is not effective for the counseling process. For example, asking too many questions, being very directive, or demonstrating so much reassurance which is not appropriate for that particular profession. And then we also talked about sex role identities and expectations. हमारी कुछ sex role identities होती हैं, and they are actually developed how people behave toward us and how people expect us to behave. And there are certain characteristics which are related with male and female gender. That sex role identity of the counselor would also affect the relationship of him with the client. क्योंकि वो जिस तरह से उसकी अपनी identity है, he perceives himself or herself, इसी तरीके से वो उसकी तरफ client की तरफ behave करेगा. And it is very important for an effective counselor that he should be able to perceive the client in a very open way. और अगर उसमें कोई फीमेल या मेल जो है वो एक ऑपोजिट डायरेक्शन में विच इज एक्सपेक्टेड नॉट एक्सपेक्टेड इन फैक्ट फ्रॉम देम बिहेव करते हैं, तो द काउंसलर शुड बी एबल टू रिस्पॉन्सिव टूवर्ड दैट डायमेंशन आल्सो एंड नॉट टू परसीव दैट पर्टिकुलर एस्पेक्ट नेगेटिवली. सो दैट वाज ऑल अबाउट टुडेज लेक्चर. इन द नेक्स्ट लेक्चर वी विल कंटिन्यू टॉकिंग अबाउट इफेक्टिव काउंसलर. अगले लेक्चर तक के लिए अल्लाह हाफिज.